Okay. Well, it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce Alexandra Morton. For more than 30 years, Alexandra has studied the wild orchids that depend on wild salmon of British Columbia's Pacific coast. In 1981, she founded Raincoast Research Society and has tirelessly championed public awareness of salmon farm impacts on whales, wild salmon, and other species. As director of the Pacific Coast Wild Salmon Society, Morton produced the film Salmon Confidential, which is a fascinating film, by the way, and was seen by more than 1 million online viewers and screened at numerous film festivals, winning Most Popular Canadian Environmental Documentary Award at the Vancouver International Film Festival. My personal favorite of Alexandra's books is Listening to Whales, What the Orcas Have Taught Us, where she describes some amazing insights into orca perceptions and empathies. Her talk is titled, When You Work for Whales. Please welcome Alexandra Morton.
Hi, can you guys hear me? Am I on?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm talking to you from the edge of Blackfish Sound up in the north end of Vancouver Island. And we're having a big storm today, so if my signal weak, I'm going to turn my visual off, and then if that doesn't work, I'm going to join you by phone. The reason I wanted to talk to you is that really all of us who fall in love with a wild creature, who, whether you dedicate your life to going out into the field and trying to learn about them, or you just love them and you make an effort in your life to follow them, you're going to end up in situations where you really have to, trust your instinct, everything you know, and be quite brave, because as we all know, the state of the planet is getting dire or concerning. And to a large part, I place the blame for this on scientists who are too scared to actually speak the truth about what is going on. And so as a child, first of all, I didn't think I was going to be able to study animals as an adult. It wasn't until Dr. Jane Goodall was on the cover of National Geographic that I realized this was even possible. So that was a huge step. But I made a point of reading absolutely every book on people who go into the wilderness, whether it's to study chimpanzees or wolves or bears or hyenas or elephants. And I noticed that every single book was divided into 3 pieces. Part 1 was the fabulous adventure of going into a wilderness environment and learning how to survive there, but more importantly, learning how to actually learn from animals, because you have to watch them really closely to be able to pick up their signs. And then part 2 of every single book was always, oh no, all of this is under siege due to some human activity. And part 3 of every book was these researchers who had gone into the wilderness, who now are in a position of having to represent that wilderness and basically try to change the mind of government. And so trying to figure out how bureaucrats communicate, like what are their motives? How do you reach them? And so as a young woman, I was completely determined to stay in part 1 of my book, of my life. I was going to ignore all things that required any kind of diversion from my goal. And my goal was to figure out what whales are saying. In fact, I mean, initially, as a child, I didn't even pick whales first. I just wanted to figure out how some large-brained animal was communicating. And so that was basically the primates, the elephants, or the whales, particularly the dolphins, the large dolphins. And I ended up selecting whales simply because I didn't want to go to Africa. And so I selected the whales and the dolphins. This was just when John Lilly's work was starting, where he was theorizing on how intelligent the bottlenose dolphin might be. And so I picked them. And because I was so determined not to engage in any kind of activism or environmental, I took a very hard line when I was younger. And so I began my work at Marineland of the Pacific south of Los Angeles, and dolphins there when the two orca, the female orca there, gave birth to the first baby that was conceived in captivity. And this was a huge deal. And the curator of the oceanarium asked me to go move my hydrophone into the whale tank and record them. I previously had thought orca, believe it or not, I thought they were boring because these two whales just floated endlessly in the tanks, the poor things. But when I put my hydrophone down and began to listen to them, I spent several days around the clock awake, listening to the baby, watching the mother, I realized that I had found the animal that I wanted to spend my life studying. The bottlenose dolphin sounds were just too high for me. You had to slow everything down to really hear what they were saying. Too fast. It sounded like I was, calling a race at a track, trying to keep track of what all these different bottlenose dolphins were doing in this tank. And so I shifted my study from the dolphins to the orca, Corky and Corky. Corky is the female, and she's still alive. And they were taken from the Pender Harbor area of British Columbia in 1968 and 1969. And I was so thrilled that they had had a baby because I thought, okay, I can study communication as this baby learns it from the parents. And I thought this would be a real opening for me to follow its development, what is important to it, what does it pick up first? How does it learn? How does it express itself? And so I was recording the whales for 12 hours at night, 12 hours during the day, recording all the sounds and then coding the sounds into a program in a computer where I would also enter codes for the behaviors. And in this way, I was looking for correlation between the sounds and behaviors. But what I watched was the baby die and the next baby die. That there was no female there to help Corky learn how to nurse her baby. And she may have known how, but she was stuck in a circular tank. And so she was trying to get ahead of the baby to keep it off the side of the tank. And already, it had these huge, all of them had these huge holes in their lower jaw because they were not very good at steering, and so they were hitting the side of the tank. And because the tank was so small, Corky never had time to the more natural position where the baby is like right behind the dorsal fin. Corky was right up pushing it with her head. And you could see that these baby whales very rapidly fixated on the white spot behind her eye. Apparently they had some kind of innate instructions came with to go to a white spot and try to nuzzle around and find where to nurse. And so all these babies ended up trying to nurse on the side of her mouth, which, of course, produced nothing. And there was Corky swinging into the tank. It was just, the tragedy wore away at me as I saw the babies die, and the staff at the oceanarium, they did everything they could think of. But they were, the environment and the situation was just so unnatural that whether they took the babies out alive or they tried to tube feed them in place or they just let it play its course, which, they did with each of the offspring, the result was the same. And so I left. Okay, I'm going to try to find the whales that speak the same dialect in the wild, because by now I was an old woman of 23, and I thought, oh my gosh, I've spent 2 years learning the language or 3 years learning the language of these whales. I want to take all that information and go into the wild. And it was remarkably easy to find Corky's family. I contacted the late Dr. Michael Bigg at the Pacific Biological Station in British Columbia. And he was so fabulous. I mean, unlike a lot of American scientists that really wanted me to, work my way up slowly, which, I mean, obviously there's some advantage to that. But Mike was wonderful. He just said, look, here's the pictures of her family. Go to Alert Bay in August. And so I did that, and I found them the first night. I was actually tied to the dock in Alert Bay, crowded between the big seine boats and trying to figure out what my next move was, because it was getting late in the day. And suddenly I heard whale blows, and I put the hydrophone down, and it was them, which is not that remarkable. I mean, those whales were there almost daily in the early years that I began my work in Johnson Straits in the summer. But my point is, I walked away from the whales in Marineland because I didn't want to get derailed. I wanted to pursue my science, and I wanted to figure out what the whales were saying. And, watching the film Blackfish was just, devastating to me. And to this day, I feel extremely badly about Corky being stuck at SeaWorld now. And I really don't know what to do. She's missing her lower teeth, and it's a very complicated problem. But then once I moved up here, and I moved to Johnson Straits, I went up to Orca Lab where Paul Spong was first, and pitched my first camp there, and basically took one sniff and thought, okay, this is my habitat. I loved everything about British Columbia. And in those early years of research on the orca in Johnson Straits, it was a lovely situation with, Paul was basically like watching over us a little bit. But there were film crews, there were other research teams, and we all had camps at various places around Johnson Straits. And we shared sightings and information, and we discussed, what we were watching and trying to figure it out. Like, nobody knew what the rubbing rocks were. Nobody knew what the whales were doing there. We knew they were doing something, but everything was a mystery. And I ignored at the same time the logging industry, which was damaging the Seneca Valley, which is one of these. It's right next to the rubbing beach. Bight is the water side of the Seneca Valley, and some of my Canadian colleagues were engaged in trying to protect that area because they knew how important it was to the northern resident orca. But I ignored that. I really was trying to stay true to my goal to just do the research and not get distracted with the noise. Because if you look at like Dr. Jane Goodall's life, I always felt so tragic for her because she had to leave the jungles, and she had to leave the animals that she taught so many people about. And it was grad students that took her place. And she was burdened with traveling the world, never being at home. And then in 1984, I followed some of the resident whales into the Broughton Archipelago, where I found Echo Bay. And by then I was married to a really cute Canadian filmmaker, Robin Morton, and we had a little boy who was 3 years old. And we were looking for a place where we could study whales year round that had other children. We wanted mail service or a telephone or some form of outside communication. And when the whales led me to Echo Bay, I was like, okay, this is it. This is perfect. It's nice, small, protected waterways. I'm going to be able to get out most days of the year. There was a little one-room school there in the community of Echo Bay, and there was mail service 3 times a week by seaplane. And we lived on a big boat at that time, so it was very easy for us to move to Echo Bay. And for the first, maybe 10 years, it was really incredible because counter was something new. For example, nobody had really followed them in the winter. Paul had his orca ladder, but he was very rooted. But I was out every single day in the boat looking for them and trying to figure out, what are they doing in the winter? Where are they? And I remember the first time I ran into the A5s in early December, and there was this lovely young female named Sharky who was very outgoing. I mean, she did all kinds of naughty things with us, like putting her nose right in our propeller wakes and coming up and looking at us very closely under the boat. Anyway, when I set out from Echo Bay to follow her and her family, she came zooming back and looked at me and then went back to her family and then zoomed back. It was almost like, this is the wrong season for you. You're only supposed to be here in the summer. And what I learned was that in the winter, the resident orca break down into their smallest divisible unit, which is basically mom and the kids, or maybe two sisters and their kids. I learned that the transients, or Biggs whales as they're called now, were much more common resident whales. And so it was just, the ideal environment with so few whales per group in these silent channels of Tribune Channel and Fife Sound and Kinkham Inlet. I could keep track of everybody. I knew what everybody was doing. And so my voice notes were very thorough as compared to Johnson Straits, when there could be, 20, 30, 40, 100 whales of different dialects spread out over a huge area. You can't possibly keep track of them. So the Broughton was perfect. And I thought, okay, I did it. I ignored the environmental issues. I got myself set up here. I tragically lost my husband. He drowned filming whales at the rubbing rocks using a rebreather, but I managed to hang on and stay in Echo Bay. I had lots of help from local neighbors and figured out all the, running chainsaws and stuff like that. And so I had it figured out, and I was going to embark on, now I felt, the most important part of my work. And then in 1995, the salmon farming industry, which had moved into the area, which I thought it was a great idea at the time, because I thought it would, bring more families and keep our school open. And I was running around it by myself with a small child in an open boat. So I liked the fact that there were people on these farms in the inlets in case I ran into problems. I mean, I really saw them as a good thing. And but they started to put acoustic harassment devices on the farms, which played a sound at 198 decibels, which is as loud as a jet plane at takeoff, like right at the engine. And the A5s, the 4s, when they came through, they were cruising along with their heads out of the water. And I didn't put the two things together. It's just always like, why are they doing that now? I've never seen that before. And then they didn't come back. And you don't know that something back until you have waited for a long time to see it come back. And so I had a hydrophone, was playing it to my house 24/7, and days, weeks, years went by. And the Biggs whales learned to reroute themselves. They began coming up from a more southerly pass called Kramer Pass, and then dodging all the farms, so that there was always a landmass between them and these seal scarers. And in 1999, the salmon farming industry turned them off because it turns out they attracted seals. The seals figured out there was big, fat, oily fish available at these farms when they heard the noise. And so it had a dinner bell effect. But the A-clan whales didn't come back. And then the commercial fishermen in my neighborhood, we were a really small community, just, float houses. So that when I arrived, there was about 200 people. Now there's like 4. But they came to me and they said, you have a really good relationship with DFO. Would you write to DFO and just let them know they're putting these farms in all the wrong places. They're putting them on the prime salmon, prawn, and rock cod fishing grounds. And I was like, yeah, sure. And so I wrote my first letter, and I didn't see the fork in the road. You know, I didn't, it completely blindsided me. And the first letter I got back from DFO said, "Dear Ms. Morton, there's no evidence of your concerns." And so I thought, oh, okay, well, let me just try to rewrite this. And I wrote another letter and another letter, and then I began CCing. This is before email, right? And so I would have 10-page letters that I was writing to 10, 15 people, carbon copied. And I'd go into the post office post mail day with these huge stacks of letters, thinking for sure that if I just got my words lined up in the right direction, that they would say, oh, yeah, we see there's a problem here, and here's what we're going to do about it. That was the phrase I was waiting for. Had I heard that, I would have so happily gone back to the whales, trying to figure out where they were and probably relocate to be able to work with them again. But they never said that. And in the end, they drove us out as well as the whales. So the school got shut down, and then the province of British Columbia actually burnt it down, and everybody left because we weren't allowed to have 10 years for our horses, and the industry just got bigger and bigger and more aggressive. And so everyone left. I turned my home into a research station and basically ran up a flag for help and said, I will put up and feed any and helps me study this problem. And in that case, it was the growing sea lice infections. And one thing led to the next, and I never stopped. I never stopped fighting this thing, because what I realized as a child, when I had thought, okay, I'm going to avoid these issues, what I didn't realize is that I was going to be living in these issues. It was the environment I was in. There is no avoiding it. There's, even if I, like, every now and then I feel like I just want to run away from this. I just want to go someplace where I can just study whales and just stop all this. But, then I read War of the Whales, and I see that what, you went through, Ken Balcom, was exactly the situation I was in, where, your colleagues are starting to abandon you, and they're afraid of you because you have become a lightning rod to all kinds of things. But there is no escaping it. And so what I really want to say here is that when you go into the wilderness, or as I say, you're doing it from your home, you really love these animals and you really want them to survive, you have to have endurance and creativity. And maybe for some people it works to be super aggressive, but it never worked for me. Maybe it's just, everybody has an off switch for that woman that is shrill and, yelling at you is just not going to work. And some good news has happened. And so I want to be able to say that, if you have this endurance, and that means taking care of yourself, and always making sure you have just enough money to keep going. Don't get into mindset, I have to work 20 myself into the ground because that's how I know that I'm doing my best. That isn't going to work in it for the long, long haul. And a couple of things have happened, just one of them in the last few days. So on Monday, the A5 pod came back into the Broughton Archipelago, which is the first time anyone has seen that since 1995. And it was was witnessed by Jared Towers, who works for DFO. And so it's like back to that original relationship that I had with DFO, which has gone very sideways with the fish farm industry. But he phoned me and he texted me and he said, you know, they're going in Fife Sound. And I was so worried that the knowledge of these whales, of how they use the Broughton, the fact that they would come into Fife Sound at the beginning of the ebb tide, that they would split and forage those shorelines, that they would sleep through Tribune Channel, all of these things that I saw them do and lived with them. I was so worried that they had forgotten, stuck in my mind, a human mind, and that there'd be no way to give that back to them. But like many times about the whales, I was wrong. And they went in and I wanted to phone my husband, my late husband, because he's the only other one who'd seen this. But I ended up phoning my son, baby, the last time we really did all of that, you know, following the whales in Fife Sound. But it was just so incredibly moving to me and hopeful, because the First Nations, the indigenous governments of the Broughton, have fought to remove the farms, and they have removed the ones that had the seal scarers on them, the acoustic harassment devices. I don't know if that's why the A5s figured they could take the risk of going in there again. Did it? So I'm extremely hopeful, and my Facebook page is full of people being very happy about this, fish farmers disagreeing with me, saying they've been in there a long time. And so, you know, the battle goes on. But if you work on something for a long time, I'm just saying, even though it looks like it's completely hopeless, there is hope. In 2017, Paul Watson he posted something on Facebook and he said, I'm sending Alexandra Morton a boat to help her fight fish farms. And I have a real activist bent, love it. Always trying to tame that with the, the scientific voice, making sure everything you say is backed up. If you're not careful, of course, you're just disregarded. And I messaged Paul, could you please take that post down? And he didn't. And so I thought about it and I thought, okay, what the heck? I've tried everything else. I've done marches. I've taken the industry to court. I've gone and spoken to the shareholders of these Norwegian companies in Norway. I paddled down the lower Fraser River for a week with 100 people, and we took over a whole street of Vancouver to go into an inquiry about what is going on with the Fraser sockeye. I began studying viruses, which I certainly never thought I would before. And so I thought, okay, well, let's try Sea Shepherd and see what happens. And so he sent me a boat, and I contacted and asked their permission to come into the territory. And of course, they were divided about that. A hereditary leader joined us on the boat, and he took it on himself to jump on every single farm and video them underwater, which we then to other nations. And eventually we farms over the winter of 2017, 2018 for 280 days. And at chaos and endurance, the government of British Columbia and Canada came together with the First Nation governments, and they're like, okay, if you really want to get rid of the farms, we're going to let you take them out a couple at a time every year. So that's what's going on. And I have a book coming out on the 23rd of March, which is this whole story. But what I learned through this whole process is that even if you go into the wilderness or your focus is animals, you're gonna have to deal with people. It's just, we're the problem and we are there's just no getting away from it. And one of the miraculous things that I've learned through the last few years is that these First Nation governments, which in Canada are recognized as federal governments, they are so powerful because they're local. And so they're local and they're long term. And so they want the salmon, they want the whales, and they don't want them just for themselves or for their political career. They want them for the next 7 generations. And it is extremely hard for non-Indigenous people as myself to work with Indigenous people because so much has happened. So many bad things have happened. But there's a way through it. And it's just a matter of never pushing yourself, but always saying, I'm here and here's what I have to offer if you want it, if you're ready, when you're ready. And then when they say they're ready and respond. Got ourselves to the next decision that happened recently on the 17th of December. Our Minister of Fisheries decided that all the fish farms in the Discovery Islands would be removed. Shocking. This is 3 big companies and 19 salmon farms, millions of Atlantic salmon. And the significance of this, the Fraser River sockeye and Chinook and coho and pink and chum run through these small islands off of Campbell River. And in that area, I've been studying these massive sea lice outbreaks and spread of viruses. And so I'm hoping that here in British Columbia, we're on the verge of some major changes, because ultimately, we are an animal, and I always try to remind people of that. I know you guys all know it, but so many of our friends really don't like that concept. But we are an animal, and so this means that when you destroy the animals around you, the warning is that, of course, you're destroying yourself. But also, if we can simply strive to be good neighbors, if that becomes a goal and we learn how to fit in, well, then our survival looks so much better. And remarkable science right now where you can read the immune system of salmon, and in that way the salmon can actually talk to us. So as the salmon are migrating, if you test their immune system at intervals, they will light up for low oxygen, low food, all kinds of different stressors, whether pollutants or low oxygen, temperature that's too high. It's really, we're unsure of how many stressors can be identified. And so you can get a readout as the fish are moving, and you can we can make changes to the environment, and then the fish can tell us whether we made it better or not. And it's this kind of relationship that I think it's so important, whether we're watching whales and looking at their behavior and figuring out where we are impacting them, and then, or whether it's salmon, which is a level down in the food chain, and we're listening to them and figuring out how to behave based on what they are saying. Then we learn how to fit into the natural world. And I know we all do strive to try to communicate to this people and to people. And I just say, imagine the environment is like your car. Would you fill in your gas tank? Would you take off a wheel and expect it to run? Would you break the gears? No. It's the same with these environments. I want people to look at these natural environments and think, oh my gosh, that's making rain, that's making oxygen, that's making water, that's making our temperature. We live inside of this. And so I'm a person who went to try to figure out what whales were saying, and instead ended up trying to figure out how to talk to bureaucrats, how to talk to the public, how to talk to all sorts. But that's just what had to happen. I just want to tell you, there's a few things that have happened to me with the orca that are just so phenomenal that I no longer really know where the boundaries are, what they can perceive. this also is very important, is to get over that we know what consciousness is. Do we really know what is possible and what is not possible? But one of the things that happened, and those of you who have read my book will already have heard these stories, but when I came back and I was and to her, how do you start training an orca? How do you get them going on doing what you want them to do? And she said, okay, but we've kind of run out of ideas. They can wave and they can leap and they can spy hop. And I said, thinking in my mind what I'd seen in British Columbia, I said, well, in British Columbia, sometimes when they surface, they will roll and slap their dorsal fins really hard on the surface. And I've never seen Orky and Corky do that in all the hundreds of hours I'd been observing them. And so the trainer goes, oh, sure. Okay. Yeah, we'll do that someday. She picks up her buckets and she's heading down the ramp. Corky surfaces and slaps her dorsal fin on the surface. And then she does it again. And then she does it again. And I race down, catch the trainer, and is like, you have got to see this. And she runs back up with me. By now, Corky has generated a huge wave in the tank. And she's riding up to the top of that wave and she's slapping her dorsal fin at the top of the wave. And the trainer looks at me and she goes, yeah, that's orca for you. I mean, what do you do with that information? When whales do something like that. There was another circumstance where I was at one of Paul Spong's workshops, and a scientist said, we were discussing captivity, and he said, I think if you're going to take a whale into captivity, you should just take the whole family, because then they go together. And I think, if we were going to do this, it should be a 4-pod. I was like, oh no. A 4-pod is these two sisters that had lost a lot just during the short time I was working with them. And I got very defensive. And, Paul finally is like, hey, Alex, we're just talking theoretically. It's okay. So the next time I'm out with A4s in Echo Bay, they would not let my boat move. Every time I started to move forward, they blocked me. In fact, it was a little bit scary because I'm always like, what are you doing? What are you doing? I'm used to a little bit of aggressive sort of behavior like that with transients, but not with the residents. And the other thing I had said at Paul's, we were talking, we did a little piece on what everybody had learned in the past year. And one of the things, I've followed the orcas all through Broughton Archipelago, but I've never seen them in Kramer Pass. It's right in front of my house. So, I would have seen them if they were there. So the A4s, after they kept blocking me. And finally I'm like, okay, I'm going to touch them. The next time this whale comes up, I'm just going to reach out and touch it. It stopped at that point and they headed off down Pass and came back up Kramer Pass. Okay, I just don't know what information. Did you hear me? Are you grateful that I stood up for you? I don't know. And I think it's really important when we have these kinds of experience that maybe you don't try to define it, announce to the world they're telepathic or any of the rest of it. But I also think it's important that you don't forget these things, because we have a human brain with human senses. And so, of course, we're biased to be humans. There's a whole realm of possibility out there of what these other animals that share the planet with us are sensing and how they can communicate. And, when you look at that large brain in an animal that's holding its breath, brains need oxygen. They're very, they really need lots of oxygen. They need it constantly. And yet these animals are holding their breath all the time, and they have developed a huge brain. If they didn't need it, they wouldn't have it. And so when I was first studying whales, I did work for the US Navy working with their dolphins at Point Loma. I was just there at night watching them, and it was actually a seismograph that was recording them, and I was supposed to make little notes, whether it was whistles or clicks or what they were doing. And it was taboo to think that orca had any kind of consciousness greater than a pig, which I understand pigs are very intelligent, but this was the this is what I was growing up in. It was very dangerous to believe that these dolphins had any kind of feelings or emotions or childhood. You weren't supposed to call them babies. They were calves. And I also worked for John Lilly as a volunteer, which he was on the other end of the spectrum. And of course, everybody was oceanariums were very afraid of him because they didn't want to be seen as holding a sentient being in a tank. So it was difficult to navigate this in the beginning, but it remains difficult because you have to always be objective. And so I think when you're working with these animals, you just have to be ready to absorb everything and don't try to explain it. You know, there was this other time when I was panicking because I was in the fog and there was this cruise ship coming for me and I could hear it on the hydrophone, but I didn't know where it was. And I, ready for the fog to just split open with the bow of this huge thing. And the A5s appeared around me. And for some reason, I instantly felt safe and decided I would stay with them. And they stayed so close to my boat that I had to keep clicking into neutral because I was afraid I was going to hit them. And then again, and I thought, okay, I'll make another recording. But they never came out of the fog. They went direction they were going. And so I instantly had to give a lot more credence about whales and dolphins pushing sailors to shore. So when you throw in your lot with an animal as brilliant and phenomenal as these whales, you just have to try your best to be adaptable and don't be afraid to fight for them or for anything living on Earth. There's always a way through it. And I can't say we've fixed the situation here at all, but there is some good signs right now. We're also, so close to irreversible damage or past it. We don't know, but you can't let that stop you. You really have to just be enduring, do whatever it takes to relax yourself. For me, it's playing guitar and getting out of my boat and, different things and just make those things. My, strongest advice is pace yourself and try to be in this for the long haul because there's so much good going on and there's so many people that care now. And so I hope all of you can take that to heart and we can make some real progress. I know the situation with the Southern residents is incredible, and I really feel for Ken, who threw in his lot with them early on and has faced what he has faced. And I personally wished I had Alaska because I was these years studying communication in whales, and who knows what I would know by then. But that's not what happened. And I'm here, and I'm so thrilled that the A5s were able to come back into the Broughton Archipelago after all these years. So if any of you have any questions, I will answer them.
Well, Alex, thanks so much. I'm going to take the time and kind of go through the Q&A and read some of these. I think I am going to bridge a few of them. A lot of people have some of the same questions, but before I do that, I just want to say sincerely, your whole talk was a super inspiration. I think a lot of us kind of needed to hear the word endurance and pace ourselves and keep going. So I really appreciate the sentiment a lot. So our first question, I'm not sure how closely you're following, but it says the state of Washington is now approving the restart of cook agriculture in Puget Sound for steelhead. Orcas have recently been seen at the proposed area. Can you comment on or address the development and what science might be brought to bear to this issue?
I was devastated to see that decision. Washington State was the leader. Also, Washington prohibited fish infected with Piscine reovirus, which attacks the heart of salmon. I think the best science can come to bear is the fact that Norway is farming an indigenous, an endemic species, the Atlantic salmon, and a huge problem. These are feedlots. They amplify all the pathogens. And I don't know whether the First Nations have backed this decision, but I've worked closely with the Wild Fish Conservancy, Kurt Beardsley, fantastic people, and really sorry to hear that. And if you won't contact me directly, I'll do what I can to help you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. One question for you was, do you have plans or are you going to get to see the A5s now that they've been spotted back in Broughton?
I have seen them. So I'm perched on the edge of a cliff overlooking Blackfish Sound, and I have seen them go by. Yes, it was really fast. But and I love being up on the cliff because now I can join them without them, which is always that being with them, but that you're polluting their acoustic environment. So yeah, thanks. I have seen them.
Perfect. As a follow-up, why do you think they chose to return to the area now?
Well, what I do know is that the farm at the Birdwood Islands in the middle of the archipelago had the acoustic harassment device on it. It got removed last year. And so I just have to wonder whether the whales were concerned that as long as that installation was there, that sound might come on again, because they don't have any way of knowing that it got outlawed. And it's literally like for us going into a room full of needles coming at our eyes, because their ears are so vital to them. And so that is my thought why they decided to come in, but I don't really know, and we'll have to see if they come back.
Awesome. So to combine a couple of questions, there's some questions around your book. One of them was, what is the title? And then where can people purchase it once it comes out?
It's called Not on My Watch, and it's being published by Random House Canada. And you could contact your bookstore and tell them they should watch for this, or probably you could get it on Amazon if you're in the States.
Awesome. A couple other questions kind of revolve around how you fund your research.
I live on handouts, literally. I think I'm very lucky, to be in that circumstance, but so many people want these salmon to be able to come back that, every time I get down to the very last bit of money, here comes a little bit more. I decided really early on to, there was a choice. You can get big, small, change direction if it need be. When the virus looked like the problem, I was able to, switch directions and work on the viruses. The other side really doesn't where my line is, because it's not a big pipeline. It's just little braided waterways. And so I don't have any employees. A lot of things fall through the cracks. All of you that have tried to contact me know that. But it has worked for me. And so, yeah, people just donate spontaneously, which is really amazing.
Well, thank you. So someone asked how you got into the career field so young.
I just, as a child, knew right away that I wanted to study language in a non-human creature. I just was a very awkward child. I always felt like language was an obstacle. And when I was a girl, I just loved the wilderness. I lived in New England. I loved frogs, snakes, turtles. They were my life. And like I say, then, when I saw Jane Goodall on the cover of National Geographic, I'm like, oh my gosh, you can do this as an adult. And I immediately was like, that's what I'm going to do. I just need to pick my animal. So I just knew, and which is really, it makes childhood, which is an awkward time, it makes it so much easier if you do know, and so many people don't. But I was gifted with that.
That's awesome. So we have a couple people that are joining us from farther reaching places. And one question was, what are the rubbing rocks? So can you describe that area and what the orcas are doing at that rubbing beach?
Yeah, so it's a tiny little beach on the shore of Vancouver Island that is made up of these smooth black pebbles. And the whales, if you ever have touched an orca, they build up this gritty skin because they're constantly shedding the outer layer of their skin. And apparently it's itchy. And so they forcefully dive into these rocks, and you can really hear them when they hit it. And they're just rubbing this skin off. And there's just one beach called the Rubbing Beach, but there are other spots in this area that they do it. We've never seen the mammal eaters do it, the big whales. I don't know if anybody's seen the southern residents, but it's a big thing for the northern residents. Like when they enter Johnson Straits, quite often they'll just skip the salmon and just go straight to the rubbing rocks and have a good enjoy themselves and then carry on.
Well, thanks. So you kind of already imparted a little bit of wisdom, but one question asked how you stay motivated when things seem discouraging.
Part of it is I'm just lucky that I don't get depressed easily. But the other part is I live in this wilderness. So I'm looking out right now at the Broughton Archipelago and the water, and when you're able to see it and be engulfed in it, I think it's much easier than if you're in the city to try to hang on to that sense. And so my advice would be to connect yourself. So somebody put the link here to it is a huge asset to all of us. I mean, Paul Simmons do a lot of effort to keep that going. So you can actually listen underwater at the time, and for much of the year you can see it. And so if you're isolated in a city, I would put your ears underwater. There might be other sites as well, but this is an enormous asset or resource for people that want to stay connected. But the important thing is to take care of yourself and find out what makes you happy, and just try to touch that every now and then, and allow yourself to refuel.
Awesome. So there are a few questions revolving around maybe some of the details on how to actually remove these fish in a safe manner, so that as they're taking the fish farms down, the environment remains safe. And then the second part is, are you aware of any restoration techniques for polluted inlets following salmon farm removal, or is it best to just leave it alone and kind of let the environment heal itself?
So as far as removing the fish, the farmers are going to harvest all of them anyway. So what for example has happened in the Discovery Islands is the minister said, you can grow your fish out that are in there, but then don't put any more back. So they take them out themselves. There's at least 3 categories of waste. One is the viruses. That's the scariest, because I don't know that we will ever get rid of them. Fortunately, nature has some good mechanisms for that, which requires the sick ones to die, unfortunately. Then there's the sea lice, which are just an astronomical problem. They go away as soon as you get the farm out of there. So if they don't have a bunch of salmon to live on, they're done. And then the third is the enormous, the tons literally per day, per farm of waste coming out of these fish, which is settled on the bottom in these big mounds. And I've thought a lot about that. I mean, you could order them to pump it all up into barges, but then you're going to get it all again. And so I currently think the best thing to do, if it's in a place where it's not moving, just leave it and monitor it. Don't touch it, which is really sad, but I think that's what you have to do. And these they're so rich with waste, they're not even rotting. They're just in suspended animation there. So I don't know what's going to happen to them over the years.
Thank you. Well, we have a ton of questions in the chat. I know we're going to get ready to go to lunch here in just a little bit, so I don't know if you have time to hang out. I do want to ask a few, though, about where people can send money to help fund your work and how they can get a hold of you, to try to enable your efforts.
I'm on Facebook. I have 2 websites or 2 Facebook pages, and so you can try to contact me there. Try to make your questions like, if I get a question of, what should I do to study whales? It's going to be hard for me. I'm not going to answer you. I'm really sorry, but it's just not enough hours in the day. But if you have a question that is very concise and you just need some guidance on something specific, I am really going to try to answer that for you. You can go to my website, alexandramorton.ca, and there's a donate page there for the charitable side. I have 2 organizations. One is charity that just does science according to the laws of Canada, and then Pacific Coast Wild Salmon Society, where I do what I call the outreach, which has included the films. And, when that occupation was going on, I was buying people's cell phones and winter boots and lumber and things like that. So it's pretty diverse organization on that side. And so, yeah, you can get me those ways.
Perfect. I think I'm going to close with asking, a few people have asked, following the Canadian government's recent decision about the Discovery Island fish farms, what are the next steps of action that we can all take to make sure that the government upholds the decision and continues to support wild salmon?
Thank you for that question. Please write to Minister Bernadette Jordan, our fisheries minister, and tell her that this was a fabulous decision. This was a brave decision, because she's taking a beating from the salmon farming industry. It's really just 3 companies. That would be amazing. And for anybody in British Columbia who is dealing with this issue, go to your First Nation government and offer yourself wisdom. Don't try to order them around. They don't want to hear that. None of us do. But offer your congratulations, because these ancient governments are reconstituting themselves amongst us, and they are not all perfect. No human group is all perfect, but they are our greatest hope, because they do not deal with international trade. They don't care what is going on in the Soviet. They are the environment you are living in, and these whales are living in, and these governments evolved in these environments. They actually are compliant with natural laws in many cases, and the leadership, like the Num in their territory, and I pay symbolic taxes to them every year because of the enormous work that they're doing. It's not much. I live in a live tax every year. Connect with these governments, because they really are the greatest hope that we have right now.
Well, I know I speak for everybody when I say thank you so much for coming on today and talking with us. We were so mesmerized by listening to your stories. The chat was quiet for a while. The Q&A was quiet for a while. We do have tons in the Q&A, so if you happen to think you might have time to just hop on there, feel free. If not,
I will.
We could encourage everybody to maybe shoot, like you said, just some real concise questions to you on your Facebook page.
Yeah, do it.
Perfect. Okay, well, I'm going to turn
I love it. There's 255 of you there.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Amanda, for doing the Q&A. Alex, thank you so much. Just echoing what Amanda said, you're just such an inspiration to all of us, and we so appreciate all your words today and definitely took it to heart. So thank you so much for being here today. So we are going to
All
take,
right. Thank you.
thank you. We are going to take just a short lunch break until 1 o'clock, and Amanda and I have put together a fun little whale trivia game for those of you who are interested in playing. So we will start that at 10 minutes to 1. Does that sound good, Amanda? Okay. So go ahead and grab some food, you know, take a little walk, stretch a little bit. And then if you want to play the whale trivia game, come back at 12:50 and we will get that started. And then we'll start with the next session after that at 1 o'clock. So enjoy your lunch break and we will see you soon.